You have been awake for 20 hours. You marched all day. You built the camp. You ate your ration standing up, because sitting down felt like a risk you couldn't afford. And now, in the deep black of a frontier night, temperature dropping, wind cutting off the river, you are standing at your post on the rampart. Armor on, spear in hand, eyes fixed on a darkness so complete you can barely see your own feet. And you cannot fall asleep. Not because you don't want to. Not because the exhaustion isn't pulling at you like a physical weight behind your eyes and deep in the marrow of your bones. But because falling asleep on night watch in a Roman legion is not a disciplinary offense. It is not a demotion. It is not a fine or a flogging. It is a death sentence, carried out not by an executioner, not by a tribunal, but by the men you eat with, sleep beside, and have trusted with your life for years. Your friends, your tent mates, picking up their clubs. Stay with me. Before this is over, you're going to understand exactly how that worked, exactly what it felt like to stand that watch, and exactly what Rome was willing to do to a man who couldn't keep his eyes open through one long night. The Roman night was divided into 4 watches, the Vigilia, Prima, Secunda, Tertia, and Quarta. First, second, third, fourth. Each roughly 3 hours long, running from sunset to sunrise, dividing the darkness into equal portions of misery. Every soldier in the legion stood watch. No exceptions based on rank for the ordinary legionary. No exemptions for men who had marched further that day, built more of the camp, or eaten less. The roster rotated. When your name came up, you went. Simple as that. The rotation meant that on any given night, a significant portion of the legion was posted at the ramparts, the gates, the officers' tents, the standards, and the outer perimeter, while the rest were theoretically sleeping. Theoretically. Because the man coming off the 4th watch at dawn had been awake since before sunset the previous day, and the man who drew the 2nd watch had to drag himself upright in the cold, strap on his armor in the dark, and walk to his post in time for the trumpet. The trumpet. There was always the trumpet. A bugle sounded at the beginning of each watch to mark the change, which meant that even the men who were supposed to be sleeping were woken every 3 hours by a horn cutting through the camp. Deep, uninterrupted sleep, the kind that actually restores a body, was structurally impossible in a Roman military camp. You slept in pieces. You woke to trumpets. You went back to sleep. You woke to trumpets again. This was not a bad week. This was every week, for 25 years. Now here is the detail most people don't know. The detail that reveals exactly how little Rome trusted its own soldiers to stay awake without the threat of something worse than exhaustion keeping them on their feet. The Tessera system. Every evening at sunset, a wooden tablet, the Tessera, was passed from the tribune's tent down through the entire chain of command, manipule by manipule, all the way to the last unit at the far end of the camp. On it was written the night's watchword. Every guard post needed that watchword to function. If you didn't have it, you couldn't be verified, and if you couldn't be verified, the patrol would notice. The patrol was always coming. Rome maintained a cavalry unit whose sole job on any given night was to ride the circuit of every guard post in the camp, collecting the Tessera tablets from each station as proof that the guards were present and awake. 4 men per patrol, moving through the darkness on horseback, stopping at each post, taking the tablet, verifying the watchword, moving on. If you were at your post and alert, you handed over your Tessera. The patrol moved on. That was the end of it. If you were not at your post, if you had wandered, sat down somewhere, or found a sheltered corner of the rampart and let your eyes close just for a moment, the patrol noted the missing Tessera and reported it at dawn. If the patrol reported you missing, you were brought before a court-martial of all the tribunes. Not one tribune, all of them. Every senior officer in the legion, assembled specifically to judge you. And if they found you guilty, the sentence was not a fine. It was not a flogging. It was fustuarium. Here is how fustuarium worked. The tribune came forward with a cudgel and touched you lightly with it. That touch was the signal. The moment the wood made contact with your body, Every soldier in the camp was authorized, required, to participate in what came next. Your tent mates, men from neighboring centuries, soldiers you had never spoken to, all of them picking up clubs and stones. And then they beat you to death, in the camp, in front of everyone. The tribune's light touch started it, and your death ended it. In the middle of the place you had lived and worked and eaten for years. If you somehow broke through the ring of men and escaped the camp, you were not free. You were exiled. Your family was forbidden by law from taking you in. No one in your community was permitted to shelter you. You had survived the beating only to be cast out into a world that Rome had specifically arranged to have no place for you. The fugitive from Fustuarium was, in the words of the time, utterly ruined. There was no version of this that ended well. This is what was waiting for you if you closed your eyes at your post. Now go back to that rampart, 20 hours awake, body temperature dropping in the dark, wind finding every gap in your armor, eyes that feel like they've been filled with sand. 3 more hours until the trumpet sounds and someone comes to relieve you. What does a man do to stay awake when every cell in his body is demanding sleep? You moved constantly. Stillness was surrender, the slow drift toward unconsciousness that the cold and the dark and the exhaustion were all conspiring to produce. You walked your assigned stretch of rampart back and forth, the same 20 meters, hundreds of times, because movement kept the blood going and the blood kept the eyes open. Some soldiers talked quietly to the men posted nearest them, not for company, but because sound required wakefulness, and wakefulness kept the brain cold. You focused on the dark. Not because you expected to see anything, but because the act of looking, the deliberate, effortful attention to the tree line or the road or the river, required the kind of engagement that kept the mind from shutting down. Roman soldiers on frontier duty developed a specific kind of hypervigilance, a permanent state of exhausted alertness that never fully relaxed, even off duty. You heard things in the dark that probably weren't there, a snapped branch, the particular quality of silence that suggested something was moving in it. Every animal noise became a potential threat that your tired brain processed at full speed. Exhausting, terrifying, and exactly what Rome needed you to be doing. And you thought. There is very little else to do on a 3-hour night watch in the dark. You thought about the men who had been brought before the tribunes. You thought about what you'd seen happen to them. You thought about the tessera in your hand and what it meant that someone would be coming for it. You thought about the fact that the man checking whether you were awake had everything to gain from catching you failing. Reported infractions reflected well on patrols that found them. You were not just fighting exhaustion. You were fighting a system specifically designed to catch you failing. That awareness, the knowledge that the camp itself was watching, that the patrol was always an hour away, that the tessera in your hand was proof of your wakefulness, and its absence was proof of your crime. That awareness was as much a part of the Roman night watch as the cold and the dark. Rome had built the threat of death into the routine so completely that the threat itself became the mechanism of discipline. You didn't stay awake because you were brave or committed. You stayed awake because the alternative was to be beaten to death by your friends. Picture a winter night on the German frontier, -10 degrees. A wind that carries ice particles hitting exposed skin like thrown sand. The river frozen solid 50 yards beyond the rampart. The forest on the far bank invisible in the dark. You have been standing this watch for 2 hours. Your feet went numb an hour ago. The cold has worked through your cloak, through your tunic, into the muscles of your back, which have been tensed against it for so long they're beginning to cramp. Your fingers are stiff around the spear shaft. Your face, what's exposed of it, has passed through pain and arrived somewhere beyond it. A flat, grey absence of sensation that you know from experience will start hurting badly the moment you get warm again. And you are so tired. Not the tired of a hard day's work. The tired of accumulated sleep debt across weeks and months of this rotation. The tired of a body that has been running on inadequate rest for so long that exhaustion has become a baseline condition rather than a temporary state. Your eyelids have weight. Your vision blurs at the edges. The darkness beyond the rampart occasionally shifts and pulses in ways you know are not real, but can't entirely dismiss. Somewhere out in that camp, the patrol is riding, coming for your tessera, checking that you're here, checking that you're awake. You take a step. You take another. Back and forth across your 20 meters of frozen rampart. The spear a walking stick now more than a weapon. The cold so complete it has become a kind of silence. One more hour. Rome asked this of every legionary, every posting, every winter of a 25-year career. Not once. Not occasionally. As the permanent structural condition of military life. You stood watch in the cold on the Rhine. You stood watch in the heat on the Euphrates. You stood watch in the rain in Britannia and in the sand on the edge of the Sahara. Different climates, different enemies, different frontiers. Same darkness, same exhaustion, same tessera, same patrol, same clubs waiting for the man who couldn't hold his eyes open for 3 more hours. The Roman legion's night watch was scrupulously kept, as the historical record confirms, not because its soldiers were exceptional men with extraordinary willpower, because Rome had built a machine that made falling asleep more terrifying than anything that might be coming from the dark. You stayed awake because the dark outside the walls was the enemy you might survive. The man with the cudgel inside them was the one you couldn't.